All right, let's dive into an unbelievably bizarre chapter of history for today's explainer. Imagine this. One guy manages to literally take over an entire country. And we're not talking about a massive army or some royal lineage here. We're talking private funding, a couple dozen guys, and a plan so risky it sounds completely made up. Like a Hollywood script, right? But for a brief moment in the 1850s, this actually happened. Today, we're unpacking the wild story of William Walker, the man who basically bought a country, and the massive corporate proxy war that ultimately took him down. So, to really set the stage for this 19th century madness, we kind of have to start with a question that honestly sounds impossible. Could just 60 people actually conquer a whole country? It totally flips everything we assume about military power on its head. I mean, usually we picture these sprawling campaigns and thousands of troops, right? Well, this story throws all those rules right out the window.
60. That was it. That was his entire invading force. William Walker's so-called army was literally smaller than the line at your local coffee shop on a Monday morning. Think about it. Maybe double your high school math class. And that's the entire military force we're talking about. And yet, against all logical odds, they hit the ground at the exact right moment to actually change history.
Okay, but why? To figure out why Walker was so obsessed with this specific piece of land, we gotta look at what was happening with global wealth back in 1855. America was shifting into overdrive. Gold had just been discovered out in California, and suddenly you have thousands of people desperate to reach the West Coast as fast as humanly possible. And that pure desperation transformed a small Central American nation into the busiest shortcut on the planet, Nicaragua. Here's the geographic reality back then. There was no Panama Canal. It just didn't exist yet. So the absolute best solution was the incredibly lucrative Nicaraguan shortcut. Travelers would sail down from the East Coast, cross straight through Nicaragua, and then catch another ship up to California. You can probably guess what that meant. Whoever controlled that specific transit route basically had a license to print money from transit fees. Suddenly, Nicaragua was worth vastly more than its physical footprint.
Enter William Walker. Now, Walker wasn't some wealthy aristocrat. He wasn't a decorated general, and he definitely didn't have the U.S. government backing him up. He was just a guy with an absolute mountain of ambition who believed he could carve out a private empire. Naturally, most folks thought he was crazy, but he actually managed to talk some deep-pocketed investors into funding his private little takeover. Why? Because if he actually pulled it off and secured that transit route, those investors were going to get astonishingly rich. Suddenly, the impossible started looking like a viable business plan.
And things escalated incredibly fast. When his tiny crew landed, Nicaragua was unfortunately right in the middle of a civil war. One of the desperate factions actually invited Walker in, thinking he'd be a handy ally. Huge mistake. With every skirmish, Walker consolidated his power. The helpful ally very quickly morphed into a military dictator. Then, in 1856, he shocked the entire world and declared himself President of Nicaragua.
Honestly, it remains one of the boldest power grabs in history. A random foreign citizen with a private militia had somehow finessed his way into controlling a sovereign nation. But Walker wasn't just chasing the title of president. He wanted that massive wealth he'd promised his backers. So he wastes no time. He starts rewriting laws, installing his loyalists in top government spots, and essentially handing out prime Nicaraguan real estate to his buddies to lock down his new empire.
Up to this point, everything is going flawlessly. The investors are thrilled. His grip on the country is tightening. But then, hubris kicks in. He makes one absolutely catastrophic blunder that's going to cost him the whole shebang. And the crazy part? It wasn't a battlefield error. It was a fatal business mistake.
Walker got greedy. He decided to just seize control of Nicaragua's biggest transportation business. This was the exact company ferrying all those thousands of gold-crazed passengers across his new shortcut. To Walker, it looked like easy money, right? A quick way to own the infrastructure. But by stealing that specific company, he was directly siphoning profits away from an American billionaire. Without realizing it, Walker had basically just declared war. And the guy he stole from wasn't just some local merchant. He happened to be one of the wealthiest, most ruthless, and powerful businessmen in all of America. Walker hadn't just pinched a local business. He had kicked the hornet's nest of a financial titan. And this tycoon was about to become Walker's ultimate Goliath. But here's where it gets really interesting. The tycoon didn't sail down to Central America with a rifle. Nope. He fought back by suffocating Walker's empire financially. What he did was launch a totally ruthless corporate proxy war. Instead of deploying his own private security force, the tycoon just whipped out his checkbook.
He used his absolutely massive fortune to start arming, uniting, and directing neighboring countries who, frankly, already hated Walker and wanted him gone.
Talk about a complete mismatch. On one side, you have Walker, sitting on a stolen transit company in a deeply unstable region that he barely understands. On the other side, the tycoon, wielding a virtually bottomless American fortune. He literally turned his capital into a weapon of mass destruction. He just poured cash into the region with one single goal: crush William Walker. And he did it by weaponizing the very transit routes Walker's entire empire depended on.
This whole clash reveals something super fascinating about the true limits of power. The exact same thing that built Walker's impossible dream in the first place, other people's money, was now actively bankrolling his total destruction. It's a brilliant, brutal irony. Capital created the mercenary president, and capital was going to tear him to shreds.
The fallout was blindingly fast. Bankrolled by the tycoon's seemingly infinite wealth, armies from neighboring nations linked up and totally blockaded those essential transit routes. They just snapped Walker's supply lines in half. Almost overnight, Walker's guys found themselves completely surrounded. Food ran out, ammo and supplies just vanished. And one by one, they watched helplessly as their captured cities slipped right back out of their hands.
By the late 1850s, Walker was starving, defeated, and pretty much had no choice but to surrender. But, of course, he refused to just take the loss. He launched these desperate repeat campaigns trying to take the region all over again. It didn't work. Finally, in 1860, he was captured for the very last time. There was no talking his way out of it this time. William Walker was executed, and his bizarre little empire completely evaporated. When you really look at it, Walker's rise and fall leaves us with a massive lesson. Yes, money can open doors. It can buy ships, fund militias, and even purchase a temporary makeshift empire. But when your own arrogance unites incredibly powerful enemies against you, especially enemies with much deeper pockets, absolutely no amount of money is going to save you. Walker had to learn that the absolute hardest way possible.
So thinking about how one single American businessman managed to completely dismantle a self-proclaimed president from thousands of miles away, it leaves us with a really fascinating question. Is money a tool for absolute power, or is it just a temporary illusion that only lasts until someone richer steps into the ring? Think about the modern equivalents of Walker and the tycoon today. Who actually holds the power? Is it the politicians, or is it the people funding the infrastructure? It definitely changes how you watch the news, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics of power.